Hey there, my name is Ryan, and we are here with some amazing panelists for the Show Your Scripts. This is where narrative developers for video games show what they're working on and show the actual scripts behind it, and a little bit more behind the scenes than you might be used to. I know for myself, like when I was growing up, a major reason why I got into game development was because I was able to see work that people did, and we want to bring that to you, especially for those who want to become writers. My name is Ryan Woodward. I'm with a studio called Subliminal. We made a game called Button City back in 2021 for PC and console, and we just recently released it on iOS and Android, and I hope you enjoy it. I want to have Liz introduce herself next. Hi, Liz.
Hi, my name is Liz Moberly, and I'm a game writer and narrative designer. I've worked with studios such as Dead Thread Games and Warner Brothers, Obsidian, so I'm happy to be here.
Super awesome. Super great to have you as well. Adana, do you want to tell the people about yourself as well?
Yes, my name is Adon Ned. I'm a games writer, narrative designer, and games researcher. I've previously written for Kiss You, Crumb Cash, and Spirit Swap, which you can wishlist on Steam right now. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And yeah, super happy to be here and talk about showing some scripts.
Yes, please wishlist all the games, and thank you everybody for joining us. First, we're going to have Liz show off what she's working on. I'm super excited about this. Oh my gosh, go. I'm just too excited.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen here real quick. So give me a moment.
I believe in you.
All right, so I'm going to talk about a game called We Went Back. This game was made with Dead Thread Games and was released in April of 2020. It was an independent studio with around 20 developers who worked on this, and we released it within the first couple of weeks of lockdown during the pandemic, which made for a really interesting launch, to be sure. But we were really fortunate for the success that we were met with. We Went Back is a time-looping horror game in which you wake up in an abandoned space station completely alone. And you basically have to find clues and solve a puzzle in dynamically changing environments in order to find a way out. We were really fortunate that the game was well received, and the team has since gone on to do wonderful things. The studio, we disbanded after this project, but it is something that is near and dear to our hearts. What I'm going to speak about in terms of showing the scripts from We Went Back is a few things. First, we'll talk a little bit about the narrative design of We Went Back. We had scares, of course. This was a horror game. We also had loops. It fundamentally is a looping game. A lot of people, tongue-in-cheek, said we were like PT in space, and literally that you are making loops around the space station. We also had puzzles, and we had clues as part of our core gameplay. In terms of documentation that we will show, however, we used a combination of things. The first was screenplays. We also had storyboards. We also had grid-based documentation to help with the loop-based nature of our design. And we also had an Instagram ARG accompaniment to this game. And so a lot of our writing was contained in social media posts. So jumping right into it, the first thing that was the most obvious were screenplays. Now, I was actually working at another studio at the time, and they used a lot of cinematics and a lot of screenplays. And I was newer to narrative design when I was jumping into this, and so we initially had different scripts. Now, the funny thing about this is that at ship, the game only had 2 lines of dialogue in the whole game. So what's interesting about looking at these screenplays now is that we were trying to figure out a way to convey to all the devs on the team what the player action was. And so there were some pros to this method. Obviously, this sort of screenplay format, we kind of jerry-rigged ourselves. Most screenplays do not have the storyboards contained right within it, but we were trying to find a way to visually convey to the team what we needed the specific beats to be. So the pros to this method was that it allowed the team to understand the moment-to-moment gameplay, which the truth is at this point in the process we didn't really know. and we were still trying to figure that out. We were still iterating. It was a little bit of putty. It also allowed us to know what the gameplay loop would be like on a bird's eye level, and that was really helpful to me personally and to our other designers. It was also helpful in understanding how we wanted to actually use the space, because we realized that in looking at that moment-to-moment gameplay and the uses of gameplay loops, that we weren't really taking advantage of the space itself, and that was a problem we really needed to solve. Now, there was one big drawback to using screenplays on a game of this nature, and that was no one read them. Like, literally, no one read them. I feel like maybe a couple people out of politeness read all the work that I put into trying to very fine-tunedly put the scripts together, but it was clear to me that that wasn't the best way to convey the information about the narrative or the story that my team needed in order to be successful. And so from here, we basically had to adapt. So we then went into grid-based documentation. Now, this is a very early version. It's on a whiteboard, and you can see my sloppy writing in all caps in pink, talking about what the loops would be. And so we had a combination of 5 to 6 loops by ship, and we had different rooms. For those who've never played We Went Back, the design of the space station is literally a donut. It is a round donut, so you only go in circles. So we wanted to carefully script specific events that were happening throughout these loops. And this actually became a working production space and a design document that evolved. I can't say it was the smoothest thing we could have done, but it was the thing that everyone could get on board with. So the biggest lesson that I learned out of We Went Back in terms of narrative design is that it doesn't matter how fancy your design is or how nice your scripts look if your team is not going to be able to draw anything out of it and be able to work off of it. It became anti-collaborative for us on this project. Now, I have used scripts on other games and other projects, and they were a great rallying tool, and they were right for that project. But for this team, I learned that I needed to adapt. And so we obviously just didn't leave it like this the whole time. I don't even remember what those dots mean anymore, but clearly they meant something at the time. And so we eventually did put it into, our computer, and actually typed it all out and made it fancy. And this was a living document. We had multiple versions of this loop document throughout development that allowed us to track changes that we were making, but also it allowed us to look at different aspects. So, for example, you would know which colors, because we had a lighting artist on staff who was incredible, and we needed to be able to communicate. We also needed to say, hey, like if you look at the clue line that's like kind of in the top third there's specific assets that needed to be made, a camera and a Voyager record and a hand in a glove. We also were able to see, hey, what is the evolving story that's happening here, so you would know at any given place what was happening if you were on the team. And the next thing that we did was we also had an ARG element. We went back, had 2 core gameplay pillars. The first was to move the player towards the horror. So that was important to us because ultimately we didn't want any mechanic to exist that got in the player's way of moving forward. So most horror games rely on stealth, but that means you're not necessarily moving forward, you're often crouched in place trying to decide where to go next. We didn't want to use combat because if you're using combat, oftentimes you stop and you engage in combat first. We also didn't want to allow the player to hide or to run away. Like, the goal was to get them to move forward. So oftentimes with that pillar, it meant we had to find different ways of engaging a narrative that we typically wouldn't. So one of the solutions that we had was this small ARG element on Instagram, and this ended up being very important to us later on. So we also, even though it's really unusual, I have tons of notes in my phone that were just me pulling out specific quotes having to do with infinite theory and the moon. The game We Went Back is basically based off Moon's conspiracy theories. So I took actual quotes from speeches like from Rod Serling, who made the Twilight Zone, from Richard Nixon, because he was the president at the time of the moon landing, and he had given a speech that was in case the astronauts had died on the moon. I also used famous poets and their writing about the moon, and then put their lines of poetry into binary code that the players could then use. We also used early modern philosophers, like you see here. There are references to Giordano Bruno, Margaret Cavendish, and Leonardo da Vinci in the game, and so we use that in the ARG. The reason that this ended up mattering in terms of developing a narrative for the game is we were inviting the players to work on the narrative with us before the game even shipped. And so we were seeing what was impactful as we were developing that. And that allowed us to move in to shape a couple of things later in development, not in fundamental ways that was going to change the production plan, but allowed us to leave little narrative bits throughout the game that were really useful. I will say that I'm really grateful to our players. They did exactly what we hoped they would, which is they all got in Discord together, hundreds of these people, and started theory crafting about what these posts meant based off what they had experienced in the game, and it ended up being a key part of our development cycle. And that's here's a better look at the entries up close, and there are references to all of these posts in the actual game, depending on which loop you are in and how you engage with that loop. And that is essentially We Went Back and elements of its narrative design.
That's super awesome. Oh my gosh. I have a few questions. Like you were talking about loops and moving forward in terms of like as a pillar in gameplay. In game development, obviously, like we have like this thing called like agile or whatever we want to call it. We get work done effectively. But I guess like while working on the game with these pillars, were they up front? Like we want the player to move forward? Was that driven by narrative or gameplay? Or what was kind of like that, like that loop of development? How much was it narrative? How much was it gameplay driven?
That's really interesting that you ask. So the original person who had come up with this concept was a designer on the project. Her name's Emily Choate, and then my friend Jacob was another designer, and then I was a designer later on in the project. But we didn't dictate to people that that was the pillar. In fact, when the idea first landed with the team, we had an idea of the feeling that we wanted people to have, but actually creating the concrete pillars, that took us about a month or so to actually, and this was a short development cycle, I want to say. This was fast and speedy, this game.
How long was it?
I think it was something around the realm of, I think it was something like maybe 6 to 8 months.
Wow, that is really fast. Oh my gosh.
So I think I'm trying to do the math in my head, but ultimately what happened is that we were very collaborative about the design from the beginning. So Emily had a specific vision about certain elements of the game, but the team was actually the one, we got everyone in a pit together, and we all decided we were throwing out all different ideas about pillars, and the two that we emerged from were things that we collectively agreed on. Now, that doesn't work for every team. That doesn't work for every situation. Some projects are too big, or some people are not interested in that process. But for us, that was what was really useful at that time. And I do believe that both pillars came from people from outside design. I would need to fact check that with my team. But I think that, we weren't the only ones with good ideas in terms of what the overall experience should be. But because we did have group agreement on it, then every element of the narrative design could be aided by every other developer on the project, from like art to UI to lighting to sound and audio. So it made our job a lot easier narratively, because we didn't have to convince people that this is the experience it should be. Everyone already understood what the experience was.
That's awesome. Adana, do you have a question or anything? I have a few more.
I did. I was actually wondering, from when you were going from screenplay to the grid iteration, was the reason that you moved over to grid was because you wanted to focus more on the gameplay? Because I've never seen like a grid iteration, but it's really cool the way it focuses specifically on, we want players to feel this and experience this for this gameplay loop. So hearing more of how you went from screenplay, which is like mostly narrative, to gameplay would be really cool.
I don't remember who came up with the idea of putting it in a grid. I think it organically happened in that we were all just trying to wrap our minds around what's happening when, and the grid just sort of emerged. My memory is fuzzy around that. I just know that the scripts were not actually working. It's not that they weren't, that if you sat down and read them, they weren't useful, but they weren't, it was hard to iterate them fast enough and get the team interested in reading them. And it was more about the actual keyboard presses and the thing we wanted the player to do, versus actually creating a collaborative document narratively for everybody to be able to work off of. That was the thing that the grid-based design document allowed us. And maybe that style wouldn't work if it was anything other than a time looping game. Like if it wasn't a time looping game, but then maybe that sort of design document would not work. I don't know, but it was more out of our team's desire to make it make sense in our head, because it did not. Everyone was like, well, wait, so that's in loop 4, and so we were trying to be like, okay, so this room, one room, let's list in linear order all the things that change. But then it was hard to get a bird's eye vision of how the game was evolving, what the narrative arc was with all the rooms together. So that's kind of how I think we just started laying it out on the board, or in a document, and then that eventually emerged. But I don't know who to give credit to specifically on the team for doing that first. And I'm not sure that, but I feel like a lot on that team was very organic, and that might have been one of those elements.
One of the things that I was wondering also, like going from, script to grid, I'm wondering like what your kind of like relationship to like the implementation into the actual game kind of was. Like, were you in spreadsheets all day and then that data was like pulled in? Like that happens a lot, right? Or was it like, oh, this is kind of like the scenario that we're wanting for this part of the loop in this location, implement it this way? Like, how was that kind of like done?
I think you're giving us a lot of credit. We didn't have mounds of Excel sheets. Now, we did have some really great, my friend Koi was the producer on the project, as well as Jacob was also acting in a production capacity, and they kept us very on track. But the truth is that there were only a couple of lines of dialogue in the game, so a lot of it came to, like, on the actual writing and text in the mission, it was a combination of two factors. The artists did contribute some of the text and that you see in the art, from like binary code and different stuff on the posters. But I also had a lot of reference material to pull from Moon and early modern philosophy, so that we could pull it together and people understood the kind of the core concept of that. In terms of the implementation, though, honestly, it was really old school. Like, we had everyone together in a pit, and we just talked to each other constantly. And we play tested aggressively. We, like, towards the back half end of development, we had a build ready every week, and we play tested with at least 8 to 10 people the full game every weekend, so that we could discuss it as a team. So it was very ad hoc in that way. A lot of projects, I think, wouldn't function as well like that, depending on what they need, but that's what worked for us.
Awesome. Thank you. I think now is a super great time for Adana to go. Again, thank you, Liz, for showing off your game. I'm super excited. I didn't even know you worked on this, so I'm going to go get this on Steam right after this.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Adana, are you ready to show off Spirit Swap, right?
I sure am. Let
Awesome.
me share my screen. Let's make sure everything is my screen visible.
Yep.
Okay, sweet. So, since Spirit Swap isn't out yet, but will be soon, fortunately I can't show very much from the scripts, but I can show some of the cool different functions that we made to help iterating on them better. This presentation is called An Excess of Emotes, Making a Multitude of Moods for Spirit Swap. And first we're going to do another introduction. It's me again, Adana, the games writer, narrative designer, and games researcher. I've previously written on Kiss You, Crumb Catch, and Spirit Swap. I love petting cats. And now we're going to talk about the game I was working on, Spirit Swap. So, Spirit Swap is a match 3 puzzle game that also has visual novel elements, including romance. And the main gameplay loop of the game is matching 3 on the puzzle board. As you can see in this video, whenever you match 3 of the spirits, they go away, you get more points, all of the fun stuff. But in addition to players being able to match spirits in the game, they're also able to chat and romance with various NPCs that are in the game, which are the friends of the player character, Samar. But it's because of Spirit Swap's large cast, this led to a little bit of a problem that I'm going to elaborate on. So, in Spirit Swap, one of the most important aspects was the amazing cast of characters. The player character, Samar, has a multitude of friends that she helps out over the course of the game, and these friends you can also either befriend or romance. But because you're interacting with them so much, we didn't want to just have still sprites to them. We wanted to emote. We wanted to be able the player to see their reactions and have them feel more alive as characters. And as a player, you could also increase their relationship with each character by either chatting with them through little side stories that happen and swapping spirits with them. But when we had over 10 different characters the player could befriend and interact with, the artist would need a lot of time to make a lot of assets, which was especially difficult for such a small team. So this led to our problem with how could we showcase a variety of emotions to the player if we only had a limited amount of character sprites, which I think is a problem a lot of games creators have, where it's like we want to show so many things, but we only have enough in scope for this much. So this led to our solution, which is a little thing called the Emote tag. Because even though Spirit Swap was built in Unity, we used Ink scripting for all of the narrative scenes. For those that don't know, Ink is a narrative program. It's very useful for creating branching narratives within games. I've used it previously before Spirit Swap, and one of its functions you can do is allow tags, which are little functions you can have within the game for if you want to, like, say, change the font color of a certain character that's speaking, or maybe you wanted to change the sprite of the character that's speaking. And one of the cool tags that we made for Spirit Swap was the Emote tag, which allowed a little emoticon to display over the sprite of any character in Spirit Swap. And what was nice about these emote tags is that by creating a variety of emoticons, which took a fraction of the time and effort that a normal sprite would take, this would allow us to showcase a broad range of emotions with characters without exhausting the art team. The other cool thing about tags is that you can use them for other settings too, such as if you want to change the background music for a certain scene or the locations that characters were in. And tags, I think, are one of the best aspects you could use in Ink, because even if you create just a little tiny change that doesn't take a lot of scope or a lot of effort from the team, it can still have a great effect on the player experience. And now I have a little screenshot of how the tag would work. You would add in a speaker, and then after that speaker says their dialogue, you would have the emote appear over them. In this case, it would be the heart emote. So as you can see, there are little hearts and butterflies appearing over the character, which was really, really cool. And we also have an example of it appearing in some actual dialogue, as this was one of the scenes I wrote where you're meeting one of the first characters of the game, Leon. And as you can see, as the dialogue shuffles, you can see there are emoticons all over the characters, which was really, really fun to play with. And another cool thing about the emoticons is because they were so simple and easy to swap out, we could swap them out depending on whether we were playing them and went, hey, this seems cool, or maybe after all the voice acting was recorded and saying, hey, maybe this emoticon fits better than this one. it allowed us to do a lot of really, really cool things with the narrative. And this was a really short talk. Thanks so much. And I'm more than happy to talk more about the tags and all the other cool stuff we did, but I wanted to focus on that first and foremost, so I didn't spend the entire talk just talking about tags.
Awesome. Thank you for showing that. So I've seen Inkle a little bit. For what you're trying to like show as an emotional journey and everything within the game. Like I've seen it on Twitter, seen it from afar. I haven't played the what's available quite yet, but you know, like with like the emotional range that you're trying to hit within this kind of like constrained framework of like emotes and stuff, like how are you finding like ways to kind of like bring that or like punch that up with your writing and stuff? Like how do you feel constricted, or do you feel like, you know?
It's like a little bit of like a balance beam of everything, because I definitely had like the writing was the focal point, and it was actually like the writers that were picking what emotes was used, which was really helpful. So if we really wanted to say, oh, this character is really nervous in this moment, we could have like a sweatshop emote. And it was really, really cool just to see how many different things feed into the narrative of the game, even though you may not think it. You may think, oh, it's just the dialogue, but it's also going to be affected by what's the music playing in the background, what location are the characters in, is it like, how is the voice actor delivering the line. And one of the other cool tags we had was different mood tags to add like different sound effects, because especially for the romantic roots, we had like a little romantic mood that could be turned on, which I thought was really, really cool and just a really great way to like enhance it. So you just hear like we didn't have the saxophone, that one saxophone song playing, but we did have a way to like set the mood.
For sure, for sure. I mean, like, video games are interesting in that it feels like we have to do more, but then you look at things like books, you know, like, they don't need, obviously, like, emotes or hashtags or anything like that to deliver, like, an emotional beat, but, like, since we're in such a visual and interactive thing, it's really interesting that way. Was there anything from the gameplay that gets affected into there, or like I know you were focusing on like emotes and stuff, but like does like any of that play into your scripts as well?
Yeah, so for I think one of the fun things was that characters will have like specific like win-lose emotes as well, which I think was fun, including to like different voice lines. So whenever the player like wins or loses, that other non-playable character will like react in a certain way. Maybe they'll have like an angry emote, like I can't believe I lost. So just fun little things to like really emphasize what the player is feeling and like synchronize with that. And it's also that said even like outside of emotes, whenever once like the player first interacts with an NPC, they get a specific skill from that NPC that they can use in the actual gameplay that usually like reflects them. Like there's a freezing spell, there's one that speeds up the clock, there's one that slows it down. So it was really, really interesting trying to like influence the narrative design of the game, where the games and the narrative pieces are mostly separate, but there's still fun ways that they can feed into each other.
I guess I have a question about it. Did you end up using the emotes, like, you know, you wanted to be able to express the character's emotions with the emotes, but did you find it became like a core part of their personality, the way you use the emote? I can imagine this reverse relationship in crafting, and you realize, oh, this character would actually just like heart bomb so hard.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
we definitely.
So did you find that happened, or was that less a consideration as you were working on the game?
I think that definitely happened a lot. I know for Leon, he uses like a lot of, like the sweat drops and like the sparkle emotes whenever he's like really artistically inspired. So it was also a really fun thing is as you're writing and seeing, oh, this character uses this emote a lot, this character uses this emote a lot. So it's really fun, like as like the character, as you're creating and writing and iterating on them, and how other mechanics are sort of like built into them.
Was there like was that mostly driven by like say art being like, here's your emotes, this is all you get, or were you the one like, hey, we need this emotional range?
It was a mix of both because we had like, I know that like the anger pinch and the heart ones, those were the ones we started out with, but we also had like I think we had like a writing meeting at the beginning to figuring out, okay, what emotes do we think that a lot of characters would use, which do we think would be like the best to use, either for just like narrative reasons or even like funny ones like the heart emotes, like using that and like a moment where like, oh, a character trips over and it's like, but I'm so happy that I got to see that it's just heart emotes everywhere. So it was really fun, like seeing like, okay, looking at like all the different characters and seeing like what would they, how would they do, how would they act, how would they speak, how would they express themselves, would they emote, would they even emote them all at all? Because sometimes one of the funniest moments is a character that doesn't emote for the entire scene and just emotes a lot at the end. So doing a lot of things with just the timing, how we made them, it was all really, really great. Shout out to the Soft Nut Beat team.
Did you find like the constraints like more fulfilling, or like were you ever just like, oh man, I just don't want to be like in this like visual novel anymore, I just want to like go off and do something else, or like
I think
how's
the
that?
constraints were actually pretty fun because I think characters ended up only having like 2 to 3 main sprites, but we like advised on which ones. So it was like, okay, we've written out these characters, so which like sprites would be the best for them, what poses would be the best for them, because these are the ones that the players are going to see and that's how they're going to inference what this player is like. Are they someone who's like very active, someone who's very positive, or they may be someone more reserved? Because I know for Leon's, he has that one like sparkle pose one that I was really excited to get in as a more serious character, but just have one funny little jokey sprite to show that he also has a really fun, soft, nerdy inside.
Nice. Yeah. Let's see. Do I have any other questions? I think like just visual novels in general are like, it's so interesting how they could be just so expressive, even though like you're just looking at these like static images just like coming up and like just kind of talking to you for a bit, or like, you know, talking to each other. And I've seen it, or I feel like it's almost like stage play in a way,
Yeah.
where you're like bringing them in and they're like you're saying, like emoting off and everything, and you have to like play things big in that way. Did you have like any other games that you worked on versus this that, you know, like felt like you had to context switch, or did you just come in writing like you normally would write? You know what I mean?
It was like a mix of both because I did some like, I know I did a visual novel for the Otom Jam, and like you said, it is a lot like a stage play, and as like a theater kid, it's like all about like trying to figure out like, okay, this is what the audience seeing and this is what the script is, how do I convey this in a way to the audience, and what are the set pieces I have? Like, it may be the character, maybe the voice actor, it may also be like the specific background that they're standing in. So like seeing like a visual novel and like seeing it from like a top-down view as a writer and narrative designer, I think is really important. So you can see this is what we need to convey to the audience. Now what's the best way to do that? Because even if you have like an absence of things, like if it's like a completely black screen with just text, that can sometimes have much more impact than if you had a character on screen saying something.
Definitely.
Really cool. I have one last question. Did you find that the emotes almost served as a reward? Did you find, like, I'd be interested to know, whenever, because it's a reaction, right? It's like a form of reactivity almost, it seems like, where like they're emoting on some level. Did you find players have any sort of unique player behavior in reaction to the emotes? Like they wanted to get that reaction, or was it more organic than that? They were just like happy to see the emotional reaction.
Spirit Swap isn't out yet, but I will definitely check that out to see how players react to it, especially since I've like seen in like multiplayer games like Overwatch, whenever you emote, that's usually a way you like communicate or react to other players. So I'm really interested to see how players react to it, as like how many emotes can I get or something like that. I think would be really cool.
You know, I look forward to seeing how they engage with it, because I think it's
Thank you.
very, very smart design decision.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Adana, for showing off Spirit Swap and going into emotes and writing with Inkle and all that. I'm super excited for Spirit Swap. Wishlist it. Please wishlist it now.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Awesome. So up next is me. Hello. I'm going to show off some of the actual scripts that we worked on with Button City. So I'm going to get going with that. Whoa. Let's see. There we go. So first things first. Here is what Button City looks like. Buy it now. Buy it. It's really cool. Super great. Super cute. Love it. Also, please wishlist Button City Soccer Days, the soccer anime tournament arc of cute animals who were trying to save their arcade. Without further ado, we're going into Unity. We worked in Unity for Button City just because it was pretty fun. So I'm going to start up this scene. In this scene, the kids just played and finished their arcade game, their practice one tutorial, and in come their rivals. So we have Sorrel, the leader, who's the black cat, Lavender, the panda, Fennel, the fox, who's the player character, and Chive. This is your team, the Fluff Squad, and we're just going to kind of go through it, just kind of show what's happening, but, yeah, go team, woo, yay. So what's our strategy? Those tough fluffs are a rough bunch. We have to factor in the new Pinerang, which is a little Gobobot character that you play in this little game within a game. They just spent all of their points, so we're just going to kind of breeze through this, but they're asking, hey, how can we beat our rivals right now? So just kind of showing how this works. So balanced approach, perfect for me who loves a perfect blend like avocado and dark chocolate. Ew. But yeah, so we're just going to be introduced to the Tough Fluffs. So in this game, it's a lot of little animals, like kind of like talking and like like having these little anime moments as they're on this journey to save their arcade. But you also get to play arcade games at the same time. Little rivalries and a great little coming of age story. We were inspired by our local game community that we were part of, first Splatoon 2, and then an arcade actually came to town as well, and we started being part of that community as well. So we wanted to celebrate that and have a lot of the same team dynamics with it within the game. So to do that, we just kind of wrote like a lot, or I wrote a lot of, just kind of like smack talk that you would have, being like, oh, I could totally beat you, me and my crew are gonna like take you out, things like that. And then we would like just replicate what we found in the arcade, especially with the Splatoon 2 scene though. There was like a mix between like what we would have at the Splatoon 2 locals and like playing Maximum Tune at round 1, and just absolutely falling in love with like the community around that. So that's the scene right there. I wanted to show what that was, just to kind of show the dynamics of the game. So this right here is what I see as a writer. This is the full script for the second day. There's 7 days, so each day has a script to itself. The top row is very programmery and sets up stuff, and then each of these little like sticky notes are what the player's actually interacting with. So some of it is just routing, but going into it, we see like just this bunch of code, a lot of pink. All the pink stuff in here corresponds to a piece of code on the Unity side. So like we could play music, we could cut the camera, we could have characters emote, kind of like what Adana was saying. Ours is a little bit less elegant, not because of the tool that we're using, but because I needed to get very specific with things. But you can see here the actual dialogue that went into it. The way that worked for stuff, like we needed to be able to show like the speech bubbles like comic books, and we would have to say like where they were and then have like what the character said, and then these nifty little things at the end. We have Excel sheets where we would have other languages, and this little tag right here would get it for, say, Japanese or French or whatever. So we could have multiple languages. So it became a lot. And over time, even before having to do like routing and stuff, it would get a little crazy. But the way that things would work typically is like I would open up a new node, and then I would just start empty, and I would use these slashes to denote characters. So Fennel, our friend, these won't show up in the game, but these are just to help me. But he would say something like, "Hi, my name is Fennel." Things like that. And then, Sorrel, his friend, would be like, "Hi, Fennel, you owe me 100 billion trillion thousand doll hairs," or something like that. And I would write through the entire script first through this way. "Oh no, that is too much. Please don't do this," or something like that. Or, yeah, let's say that. And then maybe we could turn it into a little moment where you can make a choice saying like, "Oh no, that is too much. Please don't do this," or "Go away." And then the character could react. So something like Sorrel would say like, "Sure," or let's see, just no. Just I don't have the brain capacity to come up with like smart stuff at the moment. But this is where it all starts for the writing process on it, but it can get very big. So from there, what I would do is start putting in all these little things like show quick dialogue. Whoops, not on my normal keyboard. And from there, it would create a scene. I don't want to get too into it, but effectively, it'd be stuff like that. And then, like Adana, we also had emotes. So I would be able to do something like happy loop Fennel Fox. What this kind of shows, though, is that it can start going from like something very simple, something very small, to ballooning very, very big, all the way to here when you're wanting to have multiple characters just all be on the same screen and emoting, and then you have cameras and sounds and animations and all these things. It just kind of shows how much goes into each aspect of it, from the writing to the cinematography to the art and everything. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to show in engine what that kind of looked like. I think that's the main thing for me. If y'all have any questions or anything, I would love to answer them.
I have a question that all looked really, really cool, and I was wondering, for when you're actually writing out the scripts, do you write it out in Uni/Ink first, or do you draft it out elsewhere and then shuffle it over? Because when you were showing like writing it in, as someone who I used to do a lot of programming, and just like writing it in like feels so weird at first, because I'm like, what if it like breaks when you debug it? So I usually write everything separate, then implement it. But seeing you write it in, especially with a game that has so many different aspects and moving parts as Button City, let me hear more about like that specific process.
Sure. So I should say I use Yarn Spinner, which was originally made for Night in the Woods and is open source and is really great. If you've used things like Twine, it's a little bit like that. Definitely check it out. My process is I use literal sticky notes, like actual ones, to come up with like kind of like base ideas of like what the story parts are, or like at least for the original Button City, like it would be like, okay, the kids are now, like trying to get to the arcade. Next is the Tough Luffs come in and try to wreck their day. So I have like these really large overarching things, and maybe like some emotional beats in there, like, oh, they say something and Fennel gets mad and blows up and says something mean, something like that, and they all gasp. Like that would be a sticky note. And then what I would do is I would originally try to take those kind of sticky notes and either like get them together into one larger like scene, and then each one of those nodes or sticky notes would turn into a node in Yarn where I would write out that scene. So that's why I really liked that method, because it took the physical world of like my ideas, and then I was able to pretty much replicate them in there. And then what I showed with where I was like, okay, this character's talking and then line, this character's talking and line. That's how I do my writing, where I don't always have like the full script in my head, like or like pre-written. Like I'm trying to write in the tool that I'm delivering in kind of as fast as possible. Um, Granted, I should also say, like, sometimes I will be in a different writing tool. I use one called Paper because it, like, removes all distractions. It's literally just right there, and I'm writing it almost like a novel. But that's, like, broader, like, like, story, like, things, not necessarily dialogue. So I go from either, like, the sticky notes or from Paper and then into Yarn, and then and then getting all of the like minutia of like, oh, the characters are emoting, the camera's here, the camera movement is like this type of deal. um yeah, so that's the basic process, at least for me.
I have a question. It's as you were talking, it sounded like there was a lot that you had contained in the single file, and you had several of those files. And you were saying that was hard to combine with, like, the camera and different things. Were there any things that you learned throughout development to make that narrative system less fragile, that you felt like, hey, that has been a good way for me to, like, I always keep this in mind now? Has it impacted the way that you approach like development, as a result of all those interlocking parts?
Yeah, so we are working on a sequel now, and part of the sequel is like, let's fix the first one, type of deal. So the problem with the first one was that you would get a lot of soft locks because you would have to like check for things very often, and like a lot of the like progression stuff was like in this like top row of nodes, and that was just like all these like if statements, these questions like, hey, did I already go here or did I already get here? Okay, let's route you to the right thing. So what I learned at the very least with the next game is like, let's make smaller things that don't need as much whatever, um, so that's kind of like the first thing that we're addressing in the new game, and in part the style of content is a little bit different too. So we had to update it for that. And then the other aspect was like making tools to kind of speed up, at least like the non-direct like narrative part, like the non-words part, like animations. Like I would be able to place a character down, and then on the character within Unity there was like a bunch of buttons I could click, and that button would have the character animate, but it would also copy the literal script line. Like I wouldn't have to type that out. I would just I would click it, and then I would paste it where I wanted it to happen. Same thing with the camera. I would position the camera where I wanted it, or I would like kind of look through the scene where I wanted it, and then I would press a key combination, and it would create like it would store it in a tool that we had, and then I would be able to click copy again, and I would be able to paste that in the script as well. So there was a lot of like little shortcut stuff that we could do, but we were also kind of fighting some of the built-in tools that Unity does have, where it's like, oh, there's an entire like cinematic thing that we could have used, but we opted this way so it could pair a little bit better with like what was being said by the characters. It like for me it was very much like hit your head against the door until you break through type of deal. I think that's how I work a little bit.
I also had another question, because I know you mentioned that like Splatoon 2 and anime tournaments were like a really big inspiration. So it was like, how do you like emulate that competitive spirit through like writing? Because I saw there was like a lot of like fun, cute animal trash talking in the thing. So just emulating that competitive spirit, especially in like a game with other games inside of it.
Yeah, so I think part of it is obviously just slightly stealing from your inspirations, but like putting your spin on it, but also pulling from your own life. Like for me, like a lot of like, at least for the arcade specific part, there's a game in Button City called Revolution Racer, and there's a little rivalry between Chive and one of the employees at Button City, where they don't fully realize, or well, I guess she does realize, but there's like an asynchronous like kind of dynamic there where it's like, oh, they got my high score, I need to beat them, and it's like that internal like monologue that I've had at the arcade, where it's like, oh, user, I forget, Shad, I'll say Shad, yeah, he beat my score, and like it's just like kind of pulling on that and like trying to push that to cheesiness, but like sincere cheesiness type of deal. I think whenever you're writing for like competitive anime, or like if you want to write for anime, like be sincere to the point that's on the edge of cringe at the very least, because like people want big emotions, they want these very expressive characters. So I just try to like pull from like my experiences like at the arcade, at like the Splatoon tournaments, like just kind of like, joshing each other, being like, oh yeah, we're Squid Wave, you can't fight the Squid Wave, or like whatever, you just like you lean into it and just have fun type of deal. Since they are kids and it is a little bit more jovial, like at least within those moments, you're able to like have, I don't know, it's just fun. It's just fun to write type of deal for those moments. So yeah, I think out of everything I said, if I had to like succinct it, would be just like be sincere and elevate it, and that's it. Awesome. Yeah, if either of you have any more questions, cool. If not, I could end it there. This seems like a great time. Perfect. Cool. Thank you, everybody. I am so happy that we got to do this panel. Thank you to LudoNarraCon for having us. Definitely wishlist all the games or buy them if they're already out. Yeah. Thank you so very much, Liz, Adana. Thank you. Y'all have anything to say?
Thank you. We really appreciate the time, and it was a good discussion. I loved being able to ask questions of your individual projects. That was amazing.
Yeah, it was great hearing all the cool projects that everyone's worked on. I'm so excited to check them out after this.
Thank you, both of you. Yeah.